Welcome to the Naavik Gaming Podcast, where it is our mission to explore the business and future of video games. We bring together the industry's brightest builders, investors, and thinkers to keep a pulse on current events, dissect emerging trends in games, share lessons learned, and have a great time. This podcast is also part of Naavik's growing ecosystem, which ranges from free and premium research to consulting and advisory services. For more information, visit www.naavik.co. This episode is brought to you by Data.ai, the industry's most trusted mobile data intelligence and analytics platform. With Data.ai, you can access estimates for downloads, revenue, engagement, and retention for millions of apps and games on the iOS and Google Play stores. And you can take it a step further and drill down into granular competitive sets with their Game IQ taxonomy. Also with Data.ai, mobile games publishers can track competitors, prioritize features, assess monetization models, monitor market share, explore demographics, improve App Store optimization, and much more. You can learn more at Data.ai or check out the link in the show notes. And with that, let's jump into the episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Naavik Roundtable. I'm your host, Devin Becker, and with me I have some fantastic panelists, as always. As you all know, the ever-lively Aaron Bush. We got Anil Das-Gupta here and Jonathan Anastas. How are you guys all doing today?
Great.
Excellent. Happy to be here as always.
Awesome. Well, cool. I'm glad you guys are all doing well here. We got a lot of great topics to talk about today. Unity, of course, the topic on everyone's mind, I think, in the entire gaming industry, at least the portion that they influence at this point. Some info on Korean Blockchain Week that I think was a pretty interesting event that happened recently. Playtika with an acquisition for some reason. Some leaks around Nintendo, Switch 2, and Xbox, future Xbox, perhaps. And a question from our mailbag. You guys got any good updates for us today? Jonathan? Anil, anything?
Sure. I'm dialing in from San Francisco, where I'm here for TechCrunch Disrupt. Very interesting to dive into the conversations this week and see what's happening in the broad tech landscape, because that obviously affects what's going on in gaming, everything from AI to fundraising. But always good to be in San Francisco and coming off a crazy summer of leading a streetball league, right? Where we finished the summer with the first annual Clash Cup, where 4 teams played for $25,000 with our new streetball commissioner, Fat Joe. Yeah. You know, if you had asked me when I started my career, somehow I'd be in business with Fat Joe, I would have laughed, and here I am.
When I saw that LinkedIn, I was like, what the heck is going on? But that's really cool. And can you remind me what all Clash TV, like what sports you all are into? Because I also saw you're doing like a fighting league or something too.
Sure. So our primary business is streaming streetball, classic New York streetball, and also MMA. There's a big audience crossover. Kind of germane to the gaming audience, it's very interesting to promote some of our games this summer. We did an esports tournament in NBA 2K. One of our legendary leagues, Rucker, is in NBA 2K. So we got like 10 influencers to play on the legendary Rucker court, and it was a lot of fun. It was led by Jayla Gaming, and we had a great group of gamers and NBA 2K creators, great diversity, great content creation. It was super fun. And I love places where my worlds can come together and my passions can come together.
No, I can't possibly compete with that, I'm afraid. I'm like a lot of game devs are just knee deep in building. It's that time of year, people focusing on getting their stuff ready for the fall. So I'm in that camp. No Fat Joe for me, unfortunately.
Yeah, no Fat Joe here either. But nothing wrong with building. That's what enables us all to be here in the first place. On the Naavik end, I just have a couple quick shout outs. We published a couple deep dives in the past week that I suggest everyone go and check out. Our first one was a new game deconstruction that we did on Honkai Star Rail, and really more broadly on MiHoYo and its growing Hoyoverse. And of course, MiHoYo is, one of the rising stars of the games industry. And it was really interesting to dig into like how this new game fits into their ecosystem, how much it's cannibalizing, like what went right and wrong in launching this game, and, what it could mean for how the future of this company acts. So that was really cool. And shout out to partial Manu and Jordan from our team for writing that awesome piece. And then second, by the time this episode publishes, we'll also have published a second essay this week about the rise of dedicated or private game servers, such as in games like Minecraft, GTA, Roblox, and soon much more. This is a small but growing segment of the industry, but it's still really interesting. And Matt Dion, who, of course, everyone here, knows from this podcast as well, he did a really great job spearheading that piece too. So 2 awesome pieces of extra deep dive content for you this week. Recommend checking it out. Just go to naavik.co and go to our deep dives tab, and they'll both be there.
Way to stack more on my reading plate.
No shortage.
Just keeps coming. No, definitely not. And definitely, as always, I say this a lot of times during the end of the episode, but I always recommend make sure if you're listening to this, wherever you happen to find it, YouTube, Spotify, wherever, make sure you're subscribed to the Naavik Digest, because it's free and it's good content constantly. It's not just a bunch of ads with call to actions and all that stuff. It's actually all great content. So make sure you're checking that. Obviously a little biased myself, sometimes some stuff in there from me, but I think it's all great. So definitely.
Yeah. Well, you should tell us about your latest piece, Devin, because it was kind of your top takeaways from, last week you were in Korea for Korea Blockchain Week. Maybe 1 or 2 top takeaways from that you could share on the pod.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big important question for me was how's everyone feeling? In terms of sentiment and stuff like that, because we're obviously during kind of a bit of a bear market, right? Where everyone's been calling crypto winter, or whatever you want to call it, where it's just slow. I don't think they really got that memo. Doesn't seem like, right? I think we all kind of expected there was going to be still a push in Asia. They just don't seem concerned. It's they would kind of mention it passing. Oh yeah, bear market, whatever. We're just building over here. We're going to do cool stuff. And I think that was really, really cool to see in person. Just the enthusiasm. And also, even when they were talking about hurdles, regulatory stuff, or trying to deal with stable coin stuff, it wasn't oh yeah, all this stuff's going to be a big problem from. It's hey, how can we solve this and move forward, or how can we use this? And it definitely seemed like they know their own area. There's certain regulations they have to deal with in Korea and Asia more broadly, and we know that spot, so we're just gonna build around all that. And I mean, you're talking about a country that basically makes it illegal to even play crypto games and is still pushing. And so that, I think that's amazing. I'm very excited for Korea and Japan, especially as well. And I think as Southeast Asia in general, it sounded like even from the sentiment there, Hong Kong might be kind of becoming more of a hot spot again as well. So I think very exciting. A lot of great talks from a lot of smart people. And it was especially great to see Hilmar from CCP with the talk alongside someone from MapleStory. Definitely some big brains working on some cool stuff there. So very excited about all that.
Yeah, I was going to ask as a quick follow-up before we dive into all the other topics. Was there anything there that, made you think it has mainstream appeal? Are we still kind of in the figuring it out phase, or are you seeing the light at the end of the tunnel at events like this yet?
It definitely feels like the early, a lot of the stuff that Korea kind of did early, where it hadn't really figured out how to make it more broad yet, but it kind of worked for them. A lot of some of the free to play stuff in the early days around that, and a lot of the MMOs and esports in general, where it was it's a thing they're really into, but it hasn't become a broader business model yet. And I think they're still in that kind of phase where they're they're just going to keep iterating until they figure it out. And then eventually we'll see something that works and copy it. And I think they're moving quickly through the play to earn's cool. We're going to keep some of that we can think we can make work, because, there's lots of things to try, and move towards NFTs and other things. So I just see lots of rapid iteration. Companies like Netmarble will be oh, that game didn't work, we'll try another one. That game didn't work, we'll try another one. And not just giving up after the first loss. I mean, these are big companies willing to take a few hits to push it forward. And I think that's just, again, that's Korea in general. They look like they're willing to keep pushing until it's going to work, or until they just decide their bottom line's had too much. And hopefully that time doesn't come too soon. I mean, you've got even announcements from Krafton coming out afterwards about their big Web3 thing, their kind of Roblox-ish sort of thing. They just keep coming. And I know there's some announcements, I think even, or at least showings coming from Tokyo as well around this week, as probably before this episode even comes out. So I look forward to even more coming out from Asia in general, from bigger names. There's definitely Konami stuff. There's Square Enix. There's at least a couple more that I'm forgetting off the top of my head right now that I saw. Saga as well. I think their game was getting a showing from Double Jump. So a lot of really cool stuff. I think now's not the time to sleep on Asia, unless you just really want to focus entirely on the West, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you got a chance to go hang out in Korea. Seems like it was a good, informative time.
Definitely, yeah. So make sure to check out the article as well for a lot more other information than we gave here. Lots of good stuff in there. And of course, we'll continue to keep an eye on that just whole region. But in the meantime, the destruction of all of gaming from Unity, the topic we can't not touch at this point, even though we started to cover it last week. What's the latest going on with that fire?
Let me take this one. Yeah, this is the hot topic in the industry right now. It's very fluid and ever-moving and changing situations. We can only give you the news as we understand it right now. I think the big thing since last week is that Unity have kind of issued a back down of kind. They have put out a statement saying, we have heard you. We apologize for the confusion and angst amongst the runtime fee policy we announced on Tuesday. We are listening and yada, 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 and we will share an update in a couple of days. That actually was posted a couple of days ago, and we still haven't heard anything, which is quite interesting. So I'm wondering how they're trying to back to it. But let me give you the facts before we move on to speculation. So things that we know happened since this last covered in the roundtable. Their co-founder, David Helgeson, says we effed up with the price increase. He literally posted that himself on his own social media. So that's quite, the statement to say that they got it wrong. What had happened at the early part of last week is a lot of companies decided to kind of fight fire with fire and say, well, okay, if you're going to be changing the fees, we're not going to give you any of our revenue. So they were moving off Unity ads monetization and essentially boycotting it. It was 19 last week, and at the time of writing, it was up to 424. And I'm sure more and more companies were moving onto that. So, they were really trying to sort of hit them where it hurts in the monetary side, especially given that Unity merged with IronSource. You might remember that's one of the big reasons why a lot of this stuff has kind of come together. And also, it had often been said that some of their changes of terms of service were likely to catch the attention of European antitrust regulators, which may be something they weren't so aware of. I think is one of the big discussing and talking points, which I'm sure we'll cover in a moment in terms of the legalities of what they were trying to do. The only other things that we know definitely are happening, a lot of devs have already stated that they will be switching engines. I've seen a number of social media announcements for teams building, saying, yes, we are going to switch over, even though it's going to be a cost to us, et cetera, et cetera. And Bloomberg reported two quite big items, I think. This happened at a company all hands. One was that apparently it has been discussed with the staff at Unity that they are exploring some changes. Some of these changes include a 4% cap on potential fees. There was no cap before, which is, I think, one of the reasons why people were particularly upset. Although, if you ask me, that's still, not a fee that should be charged. And this would only apply for customers making over $1 million in revenue. Installations counted towards, wouldn't be applied retroactively, which I think was a big thing as well. It's like, well, hang on a minute. If the Naavik game just sold 2 billion copies, does that mean we have to pay back taxes on it just for our prior success? It's the carpet being pulled out from under you. And the other big thing is that now there are some talks that although Unity are working on their own proprietary tools to track software installations, they would, in the interim period, ask users to self-report the data, which just seems madness. Like, oh, yeah, our game definitely was downloaded 10 billion times, definitely not 10 times, and we're not sure how all this money came from. But, which, again, just seems like, I have to watch my language here, but it doesn't seem like the cleanest way, shall we say, of addressing this kind of situation. So they're the updates that we know. It will be interesting to see. I guess I can say, so, I really wanted to cover this topic because I am someone who is at a startup building a mobile game using Unity as our engine of choice. And, frankly, to see this kind of stuff being pulled, it made me pretty angry. I've got to be honest with you. We're in a situation that we don't have the luxury of being able to swap engines. That it's simply not a choice for us. So it feels like, you're being completely victimized here at this power play that other people are kind of pulling where you don't really have a choice, which I think is particularly unfair. And I can say that kind of criticism is shared, I think, through all walks. And I think what I found quite interesting is it's not just people in my position, but even people I know at top companies, are also pretty surprised. I saw actually, I think something of interest is I think the Miniclip CFO or CCO basically ran through a kind of argument showing the numbers that would be run and, what it would mean and justifying how bad it is. And I think what that really shows is they obviously didn't speak to people at companies that high up in the food chain, which means it must have caught a lot of people by surprise. And at the same time, it is interesting that we haven't seen sort of statements from people, let's say at King or Playrix or people that do have a lot of downloads. I'm sure there certainly were some discussions had with some higher ups in some companies, but this definitely has been quite the shock. And so it will be interesting to see what they come up with. I've got to say, just to give my personal opinion before handing over to the rest of the panel, I think the real big problem here is the trust issue, right? And frankly, like, do these people understand how you even do business, right? And, boiling down to its purest form, it is that relationship. And it's like, if you're prepared to yank things from underneath people and completely change the terms without any prior warning, even if they were to do a complete back down, the damage has kind of been done, right? I mean, what confidence does that give you with anyone working with them in the future capacity? I don't even think that they've ever thought this through in their heads. It is even the thing. I mean, what I will say that I found interesting is when the news first came out, their stock price actually increased very slightly. Since then, it's actually come back down a little, but still, comparatively, their stock price is exactly the same level as it was a month ago. So this has neither been received well by potential, brokers, neither badly, which I think is also a bit confusing, because to me, this sounds like a pretty terrible move to make. But I'll take my own subjective opinions out of it. I'd love to hear what the rest of the panel think on these latest developments and where you think this will end up.
Yeah, I can kick things off. I suspect that new updates from Unity might even be announced before this episode airs, and I suspect that they will partially backtrack or just kind of re-architect how it works, maybe putting a cap based on percentage of revenue or pushing the starting timeline back 6 months or 12 months, something like that. I don't know. We'll see. I also thought that our squad last week did a pretty good job also reacting to what the difficulties may be for game developers, as everyone's just trying to figure out what this means for their business. But what I think wasn't hit enough on, and what most people are sleeping on, is why Unity made these changes in the first place. And last week, on the pod, they kind of said it was, to make more revenue, and that's not wrong. Of course, it's always a piece of it, but the broader nuance, in my opinion, has more to do with how Unity is fundamentally just a very bad business right now. That's not an excuse for, how they rolled things out, but I think it's worth just unpacking like what is going wrong that is driving such changes that impact the industry to this degree. And so really, to start, the seat-based model for developers using, this game engine, it's not a lucrative model. It worked because Unity caught the mobile wave very early and saw a lot of growth, dominant market share, and it put a lot of effort into making money with adjacent services, primarily supporting IAPs, which it does take a cut of revenue on, and therefore is more scalable. And more recently, obviously getting more into advertising, which it doubled down with Iron Source. But obviously, when mobile, the company's major growth engine, slams to a halt, mostly because of ATT and the fact that it's just a mature industry now, the growth on that core business also creeps to a halt. And, no growth, which right now also means losing large customers on average, not adding new customers. And, that's not new. It's definitely maybe accelerating right now. But that actually has been the trend for the past year or so. And that's bad. But what's worse is that, from a Unity perspective, is that, the weak growth has also pulled back the curtain on how value destructive the business has been. So for one, this is a business that has not been profitable at all by any real measure. And slowing growth has not made the company profitable. Two, stock-based compensation for this company has also been off the charts. It's been over 30% of revenue for the past couple years or so, which drives really heavy dilution. And then three, it's pretty obvious that much of the M&A that the company did, such as Weta, which it paid over $1 billion for a couple years ago, that was all overpriced and pretty value destructive. And then lastly, if you piece all of those together, it shows that not only has the business been very bloated, somewhat unsustainable, and poorly managed, but it makes sense why the stock is down, over 80% from its highs. And so that's really like the context of like why Unity feels compelled to make a change, because how they had run their business with the game engine before, it worked while everything was good, but it didn't really work when everything was bad. But when everything turned bad, like it just exposed how like unprofitable everything else in the business was, and how poor judgment a lot of the previous decisions that went into growth were from a value creation lens. But it's not an excuse for like how horribly executed all of these changes were. And unfortunately, at least from my point of view, that's kind of a pattern. A year ago, the CEO of this company was calling its customers, effing idiots. Like he's the guy who, has created a pretty bad track record at Unity with kind of the empire building model, which, I'll also just point out in 7 years at EA before Unity, it was very similar. And, the stock at EA over that 7 years was flat that whole time at best. And so, I think there's just something pretty fundamentally wrong at the top with the way that this company is being run by now. I suspect that with these specific pricing changes, there will be like adjustments made, but needing those adjustments in the first place, shows that there are bigger changes than just adjustments that are needed, that are more foundational to the business. And we can speculate on what that is, but really that's the bigger bottom line to me when it comes to Unity specifically.
I would echo that. It's interesting. To me, I agree. I think it's fundamentally probably more a communications problem than it is a business problem. For all the reasons you laid out, Aaron, the why actually makes a lot of sense. As Neil pointed out, it's the how that's the problem. And the rough parallel I kind of would make to this, though it's a little bit different, is Netflix rolling out the password crackdown, right? It's like, hey, growth is kind of stalled. We may have gotten as much penetration as we can get. There was this weird little loophole in our business that we were allowing people to do things for a long time that cost us money. And to go back to the stock piece and the comms piece, Netflix communicated it in advance before they did it, right? They floated it out for at least a couple of quarters. This is coming, right? Before it came. And they could sort of solicit a little feedback and tweak comms. And then also, interestingly, they stuck to their guns once it happened. And I know it's a little different, like stopping cheating versus like actually changing your core monetization is a little bit different. But like the super quick, like, whoa, okay, we're putting on pause, like we're going to come back with a statement, actually puts you back on your heels from a comms perspective and puts you in a position of weakness, right? Like, and if you talk about the stock price, well, no surprise it didn't go up or down, right? There's upward pressure because, hey, we're going to make some more money, right? Making more money is upward pressure on stock, but they might reverse it is kind of downward pressure. The market didn't seem to believe that there'd be a mass exodus from it as a platform, probably because it's difficult and slow to do that. And so you didn't see the stock crater. But fundamentally, this is a communications problem. I might argue fundamentally it's not a business problem. And potentially, if I were guiding things there, I would stick to my guns in some way, shape, or form here with a move forward on increasing monetization. Like, listen to the marketplace, make some tweaks. But I'm not sure, for all the reasons Aaron laid out, that like a complete reversal puts you back in a solid business position, right? You're still in a revenue challenged place, which isn't good for anybody in the ecosystem. So I get the emotional outcry and I get the epic failure from managing these communications well, but the underlying why doesn't seem so crazy to me.
The analogy I thought you were going to give with Netflix was Quickster. And I was like, yeah, this kind of is Unity's Quickster moment in a sense. There are actually quite a lot of parallels with that.
Yep. Good one too. Good one too.
I think it very much is a business problem and a communications problem. I think that no matter what, Unity, like if they're willing to make moves that they said they weren't going to make like a year ago, like they're recognizing that they do have to make some pretty fundamental changes to their business model that, even if it's better communicated, no one's really going to like it because it means that more money is going to be made no matter what. And so I think, and inevitably there always was a bit of that was going to happen. But yeah, the communications part, major fail for sure. But yeah, I think it's definitely both. But I am personally curious if we'll see it like a leadership shakeup at some point. I don't know if I'm overreacting to that too much, but it's
well. I don't think you.
Okay.
I don't think you might be. I mean, a different point I was going to say is that's fair enough on their business fundamentals, and they're a business, they need to make profit too. But I mean, they are a bloated company. They have over 7,500 employees worldwide. Do they need that many people? This is also a company that, quite frankly, has a very poor track record at keeping its own promises. They are a company that has been caught in the cycle for the past 3 to 4 years of seeing a certain feature or, cool kid on the block, trying to replicate it themselves, then under delivering, if delivering it at all, and messing up on it all the time or adding to this blow. And I can give you multiple examples of that. Like they announced several years ago a bit of a kind of movie studio thing in Unity, probably after seeing The Mandalorian use Unreal Engine. We've got to get on that. Then Web3 blew up and it's like, we're going to have our own interim marketplace that you can use. They were even approaching a lot of developers about, do you want to use this service? And then cut it. I can tell you that 2 weeks after being asked to try it, it was cut. So it was a classic case of left hand not knowing what the right hand was doing. Unity, which operates on the mobile platform, has a pretty poor user interface, library and code and things like that. And it's something that's been promised to be worked on for years. Look, I don't want to get too emotional, although I clearly am, and things like this. But what I would say is that is fair enough. But it seems to me that perhaps they're not maybe making the most obvious change first and foremost, which is to maybe double down on what they're good at and having a bit of a clean out, because I don't feel that they can be the most efficient company in terms of operating expenses with that many people. And like I say, this continued perception, not just perception, but reality of under delivery. So I'll leave it there anyway for me.
Yeah, and they have done a couple rounds of layoffs over the past few months, so I think it is happening, and will probably happen more. If this were sports betting, like I'm interested in sports betting, especially looking at where's the long shot value, like what are like the random scenarios that are more possible than the masses are thinking. And so here, my sports bet, I would wonder, like, what are the odds that Unity's founder, the one who, called out on social media saying we effed up, David Helgeson, I might be mispronouncing his name, that he's, back in the CEO seat in the next 12 months. Like, what is that, like a 10-1? Is that a 50-1? I don't know. But that would be, if this were Vegas, that's a bet that I would be, a long shot bet that I would be looking at.
Seems to me one of the fundamental things that Anil touched on is something that I've seen a lot of developers bring up, but I think people who are a little more business minded maybe aren't thinking about this particular thing as much, which is that the breach of trust. Like they may have had like a legal way to make a change like that, like through the terms of service, but I think it's like very clearly the kind of thing that's just not ethical, right? Like if they're talking about retroactively applying this to games that are already out, and when they're just downloaded new, but they, not re-downloads, but downloads that are fresh sales, for example. Like if you sell your game now, but it was made 5 years ago, this still applies. If you're basically just about done with your game, or if you're like Anil and you have your game already out on the market and it applies to that, they know you can't pivot. There's nothing you can do at that point except for either pull your game off the store and just hope nothing, changes, or that you just suck it up. And in that case, it's like, just such a huge breach of trust that I can't imagine going forward. Like maybe they, smooth this over and they get like a short term, like small hit, right? But long term, like if you're talking about your business and this company can just rug you at any moment and start taking some of your profits just because they weren't making enough from what they're doing, I think that becomes like a lot bigger risk as a business to take. Obviously, yeah, the number of options isn't super high, right? Unity is a little more, I think, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Anil, since you've done it a lot more than me, a little more efficient on mobile, perhaps, than Unreal. Unreal is a bit of a battery warmer most of the time. And so obviously that's becoming more and more competitive, right? As phones catch up, you have the whole iPhone can run AAA games now thing and all that stuff. But it's still, they kind of dominate the market to an extent. And I could see that maybe starting to shift if they really dig their heels in. Maybe not in this generation of games, right? Maybe as people, because people are already like, profits getting taken from here. Like we already have all the battle over that 30% from Apple and Google and Steam. And it's just, I don't know, just more and more cuts. And then you're talking about the free-to-play model just getting sliced and diced. So, I mean, I'm glad the people kind of hit them where it hurt in terms of the ads, because that seemed like the smart way to actually make them care. Like you could complain on Twitter all day long, and I don't think they would have changed their tune. It was only when they started losing money on ads, they're like, oh, wait, maybe we should do something about this, right?
Yeah, let me just add something to you quickly, which is that I can think of one similar example in the games industry. Nintendo, when they had the Super Nintendo, they were developing their CD drive with Sony, which would, of course, later become the PlayStation with the fallout from it. And they spoke to developers at the time, and a big kind of issue was that developers had to pay this cartridge cost, right? So to develop on Nintendo's proprietary hardware, you had to pay this fee to use their proprietary cartridge, of which they would take a cut and do it. And then they were going to work with Sony, and they still wanted to have their cake and eat it. So they kept on it. And then Sony kind of broke away from that and said, right, but if you develop on ours, you won't have to pay the cartridge fee. And we will keep to our promise that we've been speaking to you about, that you will only have to pay the CD fee. And it wasn't an overnight thing. But then when the PlayStation launched, there was a reason why its catalog was so extremely impressive and probably unlike any other developers pulled off, because they did upset the wrong people and made them want to try something else. So I think you're right. I don't think it's something you'd see short term, but yeah, I could see sort of 3 to 5 years time, a lot of developers using another engine.
It's been great for Godot. Let's say that much. Like I've never seen Godot talked about this much ever. And I'm sure they're going to get a lot more donations or whatever and support. Maybe not. This isn't going to bring them like suddenly, developing for AAA studios or anything like that. But I think for a small, engine like that, I'm sure there's going to be a big boost. We'll see. I'm sure there will be more Fallout to talk about this next week as well. So we might as well put a pin in it there. But I'm sure it will continue to evolve, hopefully in a good direction. I guess we'll see. We'll probably be back with this and hopefully with smiles instead of frowns. But you never know with this company. They haven't done a lot of super smart things to be excited about. So fingers crossed, throw down those odds, I guess. But yeah, we've got another maybe iffy business decision from Playtika with an acquisition of Innplay Labs.
Yeah, so this is, much smaller news than Unity, but a few days ago, Playtika announced that it is acquiring Innplay Labs, a fellow Israel-based company that currently supports 2 mobile games, Animals and Coins, and Tiles of Fortune. So Animals and Coins blends, adventure gameplay with a social loot element, and it's done pretty well. It's generated about 18 million in IAPs since its 2020 release. Tiles of Fortune has similar coin and raid mechanics in a match 3 format, and it went live about a year ago and hasn't performed nearly as well. But apparently it's where much of the development resources of Innplay Labs are going. And if you look at this deal from a high level view, it's not crazy to see, how Playtika can come in and try to help boost live ops performance and long-term engagement. That's always kind of their go-to game plan across, a bunch of games that they acquire for better or worse historically. But really 2 things about this deal stand out to me and I think are just worth noting. One is that the deal has an upfront consideration of 80 million, but a maximum longer term consideration of up to 300 million based on, whatever undisclosed performance targets there are. And I just think it's interesting because that's a super wide range for an acquisition. But it's also interesting because Playtika's last announced acquisition of Yuta Games in July also had a similarly wide range of outcomes. So this is now like a pattern and like kind of like a new way that Playtika is thinking about making acquisitions that is more conservative. And I guess, over time, if the acquisitions hit, it kind of pays for itself in some way. So I actually kind of like that change instead of going like super, super hard on big acquisitions where you just like really big dreams of, transforming a game and making it much bigger and more lucrative than it is, and you're paying a ton of money upfront in cash and or stock, making it more conservatively structured that's based more heavily on performance over time. From a Playtika point of view, I think that's a smarter way to operate. So that's kind of takeaway number one. Takeaway number two, what stands out to me is how much Playtika is just leaning on M&A. Obviously for Playtika, like over the past year, this is a revenue declining company, and they're somewhat desperate to figure out their growth engine, and organic growth via new games has been tough to come by. They've kind of stopped development on a lot of like new internal games across their studios because they just haven't been hitting. But the reasons I'm kind of surprised that they're still leaning as heavily as they are on M&A are that, like, one, this is a $3.6 billion company with $1.5 billion in net debt and about $2.5 billion in total debt. So this is like a very debt heavy company to still kind of be shelling out decent money for deals. And then second, similar to a lot of the other companies that we've talked about, this is a business whose stock has shed enormous value, at least as a percentage, over since it IPO'd 3 or so years ago. And so its stock as a means of like currency for striking deals is not what it used to be. And so the deals that it's striking lately, I think, are mainly cash based, which given what the balance sheet is, it's just notable. And then lastly, they're doing all of that on a more strained balance sheet when their track record with M&A has been pretty inconsistent at best. So yeah, we've talked about Playtika and their acquisition strategy before, but it's just interesting to see kind of as after a long pause where they had a lot of difficulties, they've kind of started coming back with a new style. These are smaller deals relative to what they've done before and are more conservative. And, to their credit, like this is a pretty profitable business, even though, it's been shrinking and not everything has worked out. So they can handle the debt. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to point that out. I'm not entirely sure if that makes me more optimistic on, Playtika's long-term fortune. I think they're like the foundation. I don't think these deals like transform the foundation of the business. Like they still have like bigger fish to fry, and in my view. But it's interesting to see kind of the steps they're taking to kind of turn the ship around, at least partially. So yeah, that's my view on this deal and kind of the string of events of late and their change strategy. Does anyone else have any quick thoughts on Playtika more broadly, or even this deal specifically before we move on?
Guess I'm curious then, Aaron, what your take is on where you think they go next. Do we see more acquisitions from them? Do we see them finally decide to release a new game? What's your like maybe just a short-term future, the next year or two?
I don't really know, to be honest with you. I think, as I've said in like previous episodes, from my view, like big picture, Playtika has kind of been stuck between a rock and a hard place. If your organic growth efforts aren't really panning out, that's tough. But also, if you can't really afford like big inorganic growth moves, that's also tough. And if you kind of like struggle to really justify both in a big way, it's hard to kind of see like a larger transformation, something that like really like turns the chart from steadily going down to steadily going back up and trying to hit new highs again at some point. So I don't really see that. I think that this is a business that can definitely, steady itself and is quite profitable. And some of like the deal making that they're doing, I don't have great views on like the games of like animals and coins. I'm not really sure what to make of that, but I think that kind of their newer, more conservative approach with some of the smaller deal making, maybe instead of like large moves, some of these smaller moves can add up over time. And maybe they still can unlock some organic growth in some ways. But I still think they're stuck between a rock and a hard place to some degree.
Do you think like these acquisitions help them set up for a position where they could release a new game and grow through the user bases of those like promote the game to the players of those existing games because they've got enough pool to cross promote to like some different audiences to where they're not as dependent on some of the problems that you come from, traditional user acquisition?
Maybe. I think some of the crossplay or cross-selling stuff has been on their mind for a long time. I don't know how well it works, especially just across different genres. I don't think it works too well. But yeah, I mean, even with Innplay, which they just acquired, they have two main games, and their second game is not very successful yet, but maybe they see something there that plugged into Playtika's live ops engine, they can take it up a notch. That's kind of my guess. And maybe, I mean, that still is acquired growth, but acquired and then driving organic growth from it. Maybe there's something to that, but I don't have strong views on the game by game specifics of it.
I guess I was hopeful that the answer would be yes, just because I would like to see some some of these acquisitions turn into new games, and not just milk the existing customers, I guess, right?
I mean, it still might be the case. I mean, Playtika has definitely leaned on the milking side, but I think they're smart enough to realize that you got to unlock some of these newer growth avenues in some sense. So I don't think that's what they're purely betting on anymore by any means.
Cool. Well, going completely in the opposite direction of this mobile stuff, Console's been having some fun with the gift that keeps on giving, the Microsoft Activision Blizzard trial that seemed to leak everything under the sun. Apparently, we've got everyone's email at this point. So starting with Nintendo details.
Yeah, I'll take this one. So yeah, it's that time of part in the console life cycle, I guess, where people start getting bored of the current consoles we've got, and we're talking about what's coming next. I think with Nintendo, it's long overdue, right? The Switch has been out for a while. It's been rumored for so long that the second one would be there. And so, yeah, we've now started to see that Activision Blizzard now have been told that the new Nintendo console, it will match Xbox One and PS4 performance, which I guess is kind of like on brand for Nintendo. They tend to release consoles that are a little bit, I wouldn't necessarily say underpowered, but they're for a different type of market. They go more for sort of cheap price point and accessibility over them. So that's kind of what we've heard there. This has been, I guess, labeled at Activision, especially for not really utilizing the Switch so much, missing out on some of their IPs like Call of Duty, and would they be doing that next time? And they've said that they've confirmed that they would be interested in doing it, but one thing they wanted to do is make sure they had access to it early, because it's taking additional work to support it as pipelines and things like this get more difficult. So the only information we know is that it does appear to be in development. It'll be matching those two consoles previously mentioned, so PS4, Xbox One performance, and that's where it's going to go. And it does appear that it is going to be another sort of Switch-like console, which is interesting. I think one thing that is interesting to us sort of more neutrals is that in the past, Nintendo used to have a home console and a handheld console separately, right? You'd get like the Nintendo DS and the GameCube. You'd get the Super NES and the Game Boy, and then they combine it together with the Switch. And were they going to keep going that approach or do something different? It looks like they are going to maintain that. So that's all we know so far. But I am curious, actually, especially to get Aaron's opinion on this, in terms of, do you think that's enough? Because I sort of feel that like the Switch 2 is, I'm quite surprised that it's not already out, to be honest with you. Like, I feel like it could easily have hit the market a year or two ago. And it feels to me that by the time this console is out, is that going to be enough? Because by that point, if it's coming out we're just about to speak in a moment about newer consoles coming out, is the golf not going to be really, really big and it's almost a bit irrelevant? We are starting to see the rise of other sort of handheld decks starting to become a thing, although nowhere near the numbers that the Switch has. So I'm curious to get your take on it. But that's what we've learned so far about the new Nintendo console.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Honestly, kind of how I view this conversation is like, we could basically have the same conversation like every 5 years, based on like the new console cycle. And probably what we would say would be exactly the same or very similar. So in this case, no, I don't think it's really going to make too much of a difference. I think the timing will be fine. I think the uptick will be solid. People who love Nintendo are going to continue to love Nintendo. But yeah, I mean, maybe they could have had like another Switch Pro or something like earlier in the cycle, and maybe this would play into that afterwards or something. I'm not sure if there would have been a better way to play the full console strategy, but I think that sticking with basically a Switch 2, of course we haven't seen it yet, but I think that's a really smart move, and a lot of people are going most people are going to upgrade. It's going to sell really well over the next multiple years. And honestly, it's just a great form factor, right? Like having one device that can handle the console side and the handheld side um, is great for consumers, but it also like is great for Nintendo too, and being able to build games for one dedicated device instead of kind of split between two. And you know, and then similarly, like uh, honing their services and their subscriptions and all of that stuff to kind of serve on one platform instead of being split. And so I think from a hardware perspective, it'll do fine. Nintendo is going to continue being Nintendo. I think that very little is going to change with the strategy. Nintendo is going to probably continue just getting gradually a bit more niche in the gaming world since they don't really truly innovate. But in terms of like first party content, it's going to be the same. Third party content, maybe you see slight changes, but that never has been a priority for Nintendo. All the online stuff, they'll make gradual, slow improvements, but it's always going to be slow and behind everyone else. Like, I think it's just going to be the same story from my point of view. It could be wrong when they announce stuff, but curious, Devin, Jonathan, do you agree with that, or do you have a different view?
No, I think you hit all the key points. I mean, it makes all the sense in the world, and single device versus multi-device has a lot of advantages for a lot of parts of the ecosystem.
I have a couple of questions that like just theoretical questions, right, around the unanswered like assumptions around this. So one is that if we're talking like PS4 level, gameplay stuff like that, the question I immediately come to is that only in docked mode kind of thing, right? Like I know there are I believe some features of the Switch that only work in docked mode because you can kind of get the maybe improved battery life or power or something along those lines. So I don't know the exact technical reason they require that, but I could see that being a thing, right? Where it's like PS4 level power when it's plugged into your TV, but when you're on the go, it's like maybe closer to older Switch level or somewhere in between or like more Steam Deck level, because it does seem like that carrying around a PS4 probably would not be very battery efficient, one would imagine. I mean, and heat wise and all that. I mean, it could be wrong. Maybe they've engineered that. Absolutely possible. They've done some cool stuff with some of the stuff they've engineered, but that seems like a definite possibility, which of course then makes you wonder, like, if it's that big of a difference potentially, you have to wonder if like game developers do have to worry about developing two versions in a way, right? Or do they just do a 30 frame version versus a 16 frame version? Stuff like that. Like there's definitely compromises they might have to make. And then the other kind of thing I'm thinking about is backwards compatibility. They've always been kind of a little weird about that, where some of it's just selling the old stuff to you again through these shops and things like that. Because if it's a Switch 2, like that would kind of imply, I think, to a lot of people that there would be some level of backwards compatibility. Like it doesn't promise it, but it certainly implies it, right? If that's the name. But then you got to worry about the name because you saw what they did with the Wii and the Wii U, where there's a lot of confusion with people thinking the Wii U was an add-on, right? So I got to hope they learned from the marketing last time and don't try and market this in a way that people think this is like an add-on or something you can do to your Switch 1 to like boost it up. And that is very clearly a brand new thing to meant to replace your old one. Stuff like that. It's just a lot of those questions around their kind of track record of stuff and whether or not they've learned the right lessons from some of that, or like, for example, if we're just going to be rebuying all our own games again, because they obviously saw some success with that with the emulations they've been doing, right? Like reselling the emulated versions of their older games, through their Nintendo Online program that would give you like Super Nintendo games, stuff like that. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see, like, especially if they, for example, up the quality of like the N64 games, which is like a big kind of issue with the Switch right now. If they can emulate those well, for example, that could be a good selling point to some of that audience. I don't know, like a lot of question marks, but of course, this was not really a press release from Nintendo, so it's certainly going to leave a lot of question marks. But I'm really interested to see a bit more info, especially if it's looking to come out anytime soon, like in the next year or two. I would imagine they're going to have to ramp up for it at some point here. But it does sound like one of the things that was the details here is, they've talked to other game developers about this, right? So that's where these leaks come from, is game developers have a heads up. So I do wonder, like, what is being cooked up for this? Obviously, Nintendo kind of needs a big first-party title. And I feel like sometimes the timing of their launch, either for the game or for the console, often tends to kind of lean on having a big launch title and making sure that that's ready. I know that I've heard lots of stories from Miyamoto about trying to rush stuff out to be ready for these big launches, sometimes almost having to delay the console launches, stuff like that, because they need one. And it seems like the late stage Switch has really leaned into just remakes and stuff like that, as opposed to trying to do big games after this last Zelda, which is exactly what you'd expect, right, from end of life cycle. But I wonder if now they're shifting.
It's been 10 years since the last Mario Kart. Right. Just saying.
Yeah, there we go. Mario Kart 9. Obviously we don't want the one from mobile or anything like that, right? But I really would be interested to see. They do have that Super Mario Brothers Wonder, which is a pretty big deal to be launching this late. If they're like launching that just before Switch 2, then I would hope it has backwards compatibility, right? Like a game like that, you don't want to buy it and then next year be like, oh, well, I can't play it on my new system. So I don't know. A lot of question marks, a lot of cool stuff, but it certainly was not the only leak. As I hinted before, Microsoft had a little bit of their own get leaked.
Indeed. And, once again, I don't know how it works out that these lawsuits always have mistakes in the redaction and oops, we forgot to do this or we masked that incorrectly. But, once again, here we are. And this is, related to a 2028 potential update or, complete redo of Xbox. And then also some sort of mid-cycle updates. This is high level stuff. So, whether it's changed since this or, sort of laying out a big vision, it has not come down to product specs or not, will remain to be seen. But it seemed like a bit of the kitchen sink, right? You had sort of this cloud hybrid tech, right? Where we're sort of like still betting on the cloud, but maybe not betting on the cloud so much and kind of sticking with more of a traditional console underlying architecture, obviously like big buzzwords, powered by AI and machine learning and all the things that can offer from, in-game experience to monetization and all that stuff. Interestingly, potentially a UGC game building function within it, kind of a la the Roblox engine. So, kind of high level, like all the big bets the industry may or may not be making in the next couple of years. And then also some 2024 news around, specific SKUs, which, some changes to form factor, adding some features to, controllers, a lot of like the latest and greatest technology. To me, being, primarily an Xbox user, I like, where it's headed if it comes to the marketplace. And, obviously all these things are potentially additive, but, it's more kind of rolling your eyes once again at like, nothing is secret anymore when these lawsuits happen. But, certainly not earth-shattering news for Xbox, but a lot for gamers to look forward to.
I think one thing that stood out to me from this, and obviously like Phil Spencer came out and said a ton of this has already changed. And so who knows like what is actually real and what isn't. But one part that stood out to me was that they're building a new operating system that spans essentially all kinds of devices. And that just, continues to hint at like how Xbox thinks about its future differently from other companies. One operating system that, can be taken to mobile, to handheld, console, to the web, et cetera, really leaning into ensuring that people can play Xbox games, really Game Pass games, anywhere and everywhere. And, that's a long-term bet to make that happen. But I think the technical underpinnings are starting to at least show in the roadmap in new ways. And of course, like this points to new ways to play, right? Like handheld, as mentioned. Well, I don't know if Xbox is going to create their own handheld device in the same way that Sony is with cloud or what that's going to look like in this next gen. But clearly, we were talking about the Switch and how they unlock this form factor where people can play handheld or, on your TV. The other consoles are going to want to tap into that in some way. And the play on anything, play anywhere, thesis is going to support that. And obviously there's more we don't know about, the mobile side and, what they're cooking up or what they're building that maybe they can't even necessarily launch, on iOS and elsewhere for now. But so that was interesting to me. And then of course, just like as a nerd, just seeing like, like what are the new Bethesda games? Like, Oblivion, remaster, Fallout 3 remaster, Dishonored 3, etc. And I was like, I'm sure a lot of this has changed, but kind of thinking back, Bethesda hasn't had like a big remaster strategy. They've always just kind of been taking their time with new games. So maybe this is like a new area that they'll, unlock some growth in, can be a mild, push for Game Pass and such into the future. I didn't think anything here was too crazy of a leak, to be honest, because a lot of this was expected. I just sort of wonder with like the direction it's going with the operating system, the play everywhere. Like, is this going to be a big win, or is this another Xbox One moment where they kind of spread out what they wanted to be too far? And at that time, it was like, we're going to be your home everything device. But, gamers didn't really care about that, and non-gamers weren't going to buy an Xbox to be that device, and that didn't really work, and they had to backtrack. So I'm curious, what kind of moment will it be? An Xbox One moment or something more successful once it's actually live? But those are my quick thoughts.
I think you're right. Philosophically, what I'm sort of hearing here through both of these things that's been illuminating to me as a parent is, I think at least I'm in the generation where like things are occasion based, right? Even like as an early streamer, all that stuff, there was stuff that was for the big screen and stuff that was for the small screen and stuff that was for this. And, a thread I see in this is, it's handheld or it's, console, it's mobile or it's console. And I see in my son, content consumption isn't occasional, right? There's just this completely seamless migration from like a big screen to a pad to a phone in a car to a home. And the true line is the content and not the occasion. And there seems to be far less focus on the device of delivery or the screen size than like for my generation. And I'm reminded of that in sort of, hearing conversation about both of these platforms, right? That the idea about occasion in gaming and content consumption is just going away.
I think it's really interesting to see what they're going to come up with. But I'm a little bit surprised, actually, that they are even making new hardware. I thought that the current Xbox might be the last and they would go completely cloud. So for me, the leak of it being a kind of hybrid cloud hardware mechanism makes more sense. Like, there already is one version of the Xbox without a hard drive, right, already. So they have already kind of experimented that. This even goes back to the Don Matrick days of it. It was all going to be digital DLC only and that division. But I think it speaks more to, the Netflix of games approach. So, I'll be honest, I'm a bit surprised that it's maybe not as revolutionary as I thought it might be. I thought they might use this as being the real opportunity to be like, no, now it is, like, there is no hardware. You're going to get all these updates, or it might even be another update of the current console rather than going for a new one. So I'm curious as to how often they'll go. I suppose at the same time, because if you look at sales numbers, the current round of Xboxes have done around 20 million compared to PS5, which is like 40 million. So this is, I think, the first time in a while that I would say they've not, and maybe it's a bit harsh for me to say they've not really been in the race, but that's quite a beating, I would say, compared to sort of like the glory days of Xbox 360, where they beat the PS3, right? At least in America, maybe not globally, but they certainly beat them in NA. Yeah, at the same time, we're very complimentary about Microsoft's strategy on this roundtable, and I think for good reason. I think we all think that the kind of subscription for everybody is a very good approach and one that should ultimately win out. And it's just a matter of time before we all get it and just play their games, because why would you not do that? Hence why I'm a bit surprised about the hardware. So I'm rambling on a bit here. Apologies for that, but interested to see what it is. I think it'll just be way more cloud. I think the OS being working across all platforms makes perfect sense. Doesn't sort of nothing jumps out as being a bad idea. Sounds very sensible to me.
Yeah, this also connects to a mailbag item that we've been sitting on for a little bit, and it says, "Curious, you all should do some digging in and around the Azure part of the Microsoft cloud gaming space. I've always thought that Microsoft's end goal was to own the servers that power cloud gaming, and everything is a means to that. Kind of like how AWS saw growth because of Netflix streaming video." So I guess I'll connect a couple threads here. One with what you were saying, Anil, and two to this question. And really the core of it is that I don't think Microsoft is betting on a cloud gaming based future. They're betting on an ecosystem of hardware, of other people's hardware, of the cloud, of anywhere they could possibly be, to drive the kind of gaming experience that people might want. And different people have different needs or preferences. And as for the Azure part, like, yeah, that's of course like a fantastic advantage to have, and it's a way better business than gaming is for Microsoft, obviously. And Azure will definitely benefit from any growth in cloud streaming, including the gaming side of that. Not just from Xbox, but even from PlayStation 2. I don't know if it's still the case, but I remember 3 years ago or so, it was announced that PlayStation was going to be working with Azure on its cloud streaming abilities. And I haven't heard otherwise yet, so I assume that still is a thing. But Azure is absolutely a competitive advantage, especially for being able to integrate your own services into your own technology and making it more seamless and such over time. But really, like, the truth of the matter is that cloud gaming still isn't awesome yet, and it has a lot of limitations, and a lot of these limitations are rooted in like actual physics of latency and such that like are not easily solvable and probably will not be solved for a long time, if ever, some people think. And so I think, kind of even taking this back to what you're saying, Anil, I think it actually is like super critical that Xbox like has to continue to lean on hardware for a very long time, because any other means that it's not putting its best foot forward in like promoting like its games being played in the highest quality kind of way, which of course,
yeah, that's fair. It's like a luxury. It is a bit of a luxury brand in that sense. It's definitely cheap. Well, I was just going to say something. I want to interject. I don't disagree with you. I think, in fact, that's a great rebuttal. That's very true, actually. So I think that's a great way to answer what I'd said there. I was going to say that I do remember in the Bill Gates era, Microsoft's sort of company mission was that they wanted everybody in the world to be using Microsoft Windows on the PC. And they basically achieved that, I would say, right? And then they realized, because they were so successful, they needed an even more ballsy statement. And they were like, okay, but hear me out. There are some people that are playing with digital entertainment, but it's not running Microsoft Windows operating system. So what if we made our own console? Now there's going to be a PC or a computer in everyone's home, and it's going to be running our product. And that's the real reason why they went into Xbox. And there we go. There was also sort of a Dreamcast where I let Devin say they're running Windows CE and things like this. So that was their big thing in trying to do that. But they didn't really win that battle, right? They tried their hardest. They were quite successful. But I think, honestly, there was even talk when Satya Nadella took over that they might even want to sell the Xbox division. But I think they sort of found that they'd made this new division that was super profitable and lucrative, even if it didn't quite fit into its original company vision, and they sort of changed it. So where I'm going with this is, I wonder if now is their company mission that no matter what hardware you're running anywhere in the world, it will be powered by a Microsoft service in the cloud. And it is quite similar to their original concept that everything runs through them, no matter what their hardware is. And I feel like that's where they're going, and that's why gaming is a big part of it, but it's not the only part of it. But hey, just a thought from me throwing it out there.
It is interesting. And I think that, like, if anything, like Microsoft's overall mission and like gaming's mission, Xbox's mission, probably are not completely, I don't want to say compatible, because maybe they can both like exist at the same time, but they're not like perfectly in sync in like a beautiful way. And if anything, like if you look at kind of like what they're doing, I mentioned the operating, like building an operating system that works on every device, kind of pushing that out. And in a lot of sense, that's like the old Microsoft strategy that was very like Windows first. We're going to try to put Windows on as many devices as we can. We're even going to create some of our own hardware in new categories to push that forward. And that didn't really work. And, then Satya Nadella came on as new CEO and said, like, if we're going to take Microsoft to the next level, like, our strategy can't be Windows. It has to be like serving the enterprise in the cloud, in as many ways as we can there. And of course, we'll still have Microsoft and Windows as an operating system and sell Microsoft Office and all of that stuff. But that's not the core like driver now. And I sort of wonder with gaming, like, obviously they're not forcing their operating system on to, other companies, other hardware, necessarily other consoles and such. But yeah, it's not completely in sync with the overall Microsoft vision. I don't know if it makes sense to be. They serve completely different markets, and therefore should probably have completely different strategies. But But yeah, I think the operating system part is still fair, but at the end of the day, it still was really important how they can compete in hardware for the foreseeable future. And I think they're still kind of at a disadvantage there unless something really shakes up. But I kind of doubt that's going to be the case. So I think it's not going to be a flip the switch moment of their strategy from console to no console. It's really like cloud is like a tiny thing, so they're hoping it'll be more important in a hybrid, and then maybe one day play anywhere. They won't have to worry about the hardware pieces, I would guess, but that is a long time coming, if ever, I'd guess.
Yeah, I've noticed a couple of trends that I think all kind of point towards not necessarily cloud as in like playing a game off the cloud, but as in trying to get you to centralize your things to the cloud. So like for one thing, Windows has been pushing OneDrive more like deeper and deeper integrated. Like I'm on Windows 11 and it's like actually difficult to not use OneDrive. Like they really make it a pain. They also don't make it very good. I've had a number of problems with files and whatnot, but they're definitely trying to push people to get their documents in the cloud, and they push that with like Microsoft 365 stuff for the office workers to have their stuff in the cloud. Obviously, COVID was like a huge boost for them. Like Microsoft Teams gained some great traction. Skype was pretty much all but forgotten about. Teams kind of took its place, alongside Zoom. So they've definitely been pushing people more and more into these like sort of central online repositories. Obviously, the Xbox stuff isn't doing that so much yet in the sense that like your saved game files aren't in your OneDrive, but I feel like that's kind of something that comes, eventually where, you're playing on your PC, you're playing on your Xbox, and all of a sudden they're both like centralized your saved game files in progress and your game tag, all that stuff on your OneDrive or whatever you want to call it, your Azure server, like centralizing this stuff so that you're a little more dependent on them. The operating system is more just a client to this bigger sort of nest they're trying to build in the cloud. And I feel like that's been more their strategy, where it's like inching people in there. Obviously, the big problem with trying to force people into the cloud, besides just the normal physics problems, is just lack of good internet in huge parts of the country. Like rural parts of the country, if Microsoft tried to push entirely cloud-based gaming, then they would either just like have to use an old Xbox or switch over to Sony, because they wouldn't have a lot, or I guess Nintendo, but they wouldn't have a lot of choices then, because they wouldn't even have the bandwidth to download a huge game, even if like they could. And so there's definitely parts of the country they just can't target that way. And so this is like a gradual shift, and it's shifting more and more people into Microsoft accounts for everything, into, Office apps in the cloud, into, obviously they failed with Hotmail, and I don't know if they've managed to get much traction in email. Gmail seems to dominate that, but I imagine they'll make another play at that at some point and try and push that as well. And so that seems to me to be their strategy, is to just get people to do everything with an internet connection to your account, to their servers. On the gaming server side, though, I've definitely seen like sometimes the progress fall back. So like when Siege came out, I know I'm biased and know enough about it to at least kind of bring it up a lot as an example, but it started out running on Azure servers. They had a lot of problems. It wasn't the best. I don't think Azure was really super prepared at that time. This was a while ago. Siege, I think, is 8 or 9 years old now. Rainbow Six Siege, to be clear. And it had problems. And eventually, I think they smoothed most of them out. But then eventually that game moved to PlayFab on Amazon servers. And I'm assuming it's still there. I haven't checked anytime recently. But like, obviously, whatever was going on wasn't a big enough deal for them to want to stay there. And so I feel like maybe Microsoft still has some more progress to make on Azure servers. It might have been a deal as well that they were paying or subsidizing costs or something for Ubisoft, and that was why Ubisoft did it. But Ubisoft is pretty big in the cloud and streaming and downloading space, so I would think that's pretty important to them. Even though they're obviously, I could see them having stuff on Game Pass or something like that down the road. But I don't know. There's a lot of like short like hops forward, but I still feel like they're so far from that like cloud dream. It's more just like, can we get everyone to at least like use our stuff and attach it to either an Xbox account or a Microsoft account? And like, that's the dream for now.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say is it's hard to have your cake and eat it too. It's hard to have everyone. It's hard to build your own ecosystem where you compete with everyone with games and time spent, and then also try to be the service provider in as many ways as you can for an industry. So they'll probably have to, just pick a path really, and stick to it. And it seems like Game Pass and the ecosystem around that is really their primary focus, and all their efforts going to go towards figuring out how that's viable in an ever-changing future. but we shall see.
I would say the short-term guarantee is subscription models coming out of them, right? Like,
yes,
that part's not going anywhere for now. Unless a better business model comes out that replaces it, we're going to see more and more subscriptions from them. You already saw that too, where they changed like the Xbox Gold around and all that stuff. So yeah, I'm sure we'll see a lot more of that. But I doubt Microsoft will leave the topics anytime soon. They always find a way to come back, even if it's through their court documents. But we'll see what they got in store. But anyways, as the last comment, I do feel like they moved to this cloud stuff almost out of revenge for losing the HD DVD versus Blu-ray war. They're like, screw discs then, man. We're moving on. But anyways, I want to thank our great panelists as always. Some great conversation, lots of cool stuff going on. Some maybe not so cool stuff that hopefully will get cool for the next couple of weeks. But definitely make sure to subscribe if you haven't already to the Naavik Digest. Check it out there. Also, if you are listening on YouTube, make sure to also check us out on Spotify or I think Apple Podcasts. If we're on there as well. Subscribe on your native platform so you don't necessarily have to watch the video if you don't want to. And also, lastly, of course, as a reminder, you just heard a mailbag question there. Make sure to get your emails in to podcast@naavik.co. If you've got feedback, comments, questions, as this person did, whatever, shoot stuff over. If we don't like it, we don't have to say it, but shoot over whatever you want to say. We love getting feedback from you guys. It's definitely helpful. So make sure to do that. But thanks again to listeners as well. And we will see you next week. In the meantime, enjoy your weekend.
If you enjoyed today's episode, whether on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, or give a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out or provide feedback, shoot us a note at podcast@naavik.co or find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Plus, if you want to learn more about what Naavik has to offer, make sure to check out our website, www.naavik.co. There, you can sign up for the #1 games industry newsletter, Naavik Digest, or contact us to learn about our wide-ranging consulting and advisory services. Again, that is www.naavik.co. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.